Hello and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Planet Critical, a podcast for a world in crisis. My guest this week is Alice Friedemann, author of When Trucks Stop Running, Energy and the Future of Transportation. She's also the author of the website energyskeptic.com, which is a wealth of resources, information, and mind-blowing theories about what's going on in the world. Alice joined me to discuss energy, of course, fossil fuels, life after fossil fuels, peak oil, where we're going to go, how it's going to happen. And this really is one of my favorite episodes I've ever recorded. She has an astute understanding of how the energy market and energy supplies are affecting our world. And also, theories about how that's going to pan out, but tells it in such a way that, quite frankly, we giggled a lot during this episode. Perhaps a little bit at the futility of the situation, but also because it's kind of like living in an Alice in Wonderland world right now, in which all the data is out there, all of the information is out there about how we are in an energy, economic, and ecological crisis and what to do about it. But because that data is kind of so difficult to stomach and because the solutions are not clear cut, nothing's being done. Alice highlighted so many fascinating things during this interview. I really would recommend that you go and listen to it if you haven't already. I think my favorite quote was the IPCC report is pure capitalism, in which she explains how in the IPCC models, they assume no limits to growth. So they assume that we will be pulling out unlimited oil until I think it was 2400, the year 2400. Which is nonsense, of course, given we hit peak oil in 2018. She explains how 11 of the 12 past recessions were caused by high oil prices and has a very interesting analysis of Syria, Yemen, and Venezuela as failed states due to their oil markets crashing. We discussed a couple of the fallacies that go around climate activism, like plastics versus bioplastics, the fact that this modern world, certainly our quality of life, cannot continue without plastics. Think of the medical industry. And that bioplastics, i.e. natural resources and natural space that could be used to grow food in the future, would be used to replace an incredibly efficient and safe material, is just madness. One of the other topics that Alice touches on frequently throughout the interview is her frustration with the climate change conversation, i.e. the fact that climate change, whatever that really means, is distracting from the biodiversity crisis, from the oxygen crisis, from the water crisis. And funnily enough, this is something I first started to think about in 2021 when I interviewed the twins Wolf, Chris and Ryan Wolf of Adventure Hydrology, who have this amazing YouTube channel that kind of tries to explain the impact of climate change in a way that's really, really accessible to most people. And a lot of their focus is on water because Chris is a hydrologist. And I was amazed during that interview to hear about how fragile our water systems are in the world and what will happen if those water systems are not protected. We focus on greenhouse gases, we focus on carbon, we focus essentially on things that will impact our quality of life in the future, certainly in the West. And we're ignoring one of the elements that will literally cause life or death scenarios for most people in the world. Nobody can live without water. Nothing can live without water. So essentially, it's this kind of treating fossil fuels as this mythical omen or this mythical bad guy upon which we can pin all of our frustrations and blame essentially for the situation that we find ourselves in, and believe that if we get rid of the bad guy, everything will be better. Fossil fuels are not the bad guy. You just have to listen to my interview with Nate Higgins to realize how much fuel and energy they've actually given us. They've allowed us to develop and progress, quite frankly, beyond a state of precarity, which is hugely essential to, social progression. Interestingly enough, because of that, fossil fuels are also the one thing that we can't abandon overnight. And because of how cheap and efficient they are, there's also no energy source that we can replace them with to continue our way of life. So we are looking at systemic structural changes in order to not kill off half of the people on the planet, in order to maintain the good part of progress that has come over the past 100 years. And that's extremely complicated. But the solutions that are touted are get rid of fossil fuels, which is impossible, And at the same time, forests continue to be cut down, which is something that we could stop tomorrow that would have a dramatically positive impact on the planet. It's also refocusing the conversation away from water, away from oxygen, away from biodiversity. And all of these things are in crisis. And it was Anastasia Makarieva on the show a few weeks ago now who said, why is the attention being driven there to the one thing that we cannot live without, when there are plenty of things that we could do tomorrow that would radically benefit the planet and the people, and we're not talking about them? This is one of those conversations that plucks at multiple threads on the web of the crisis that we find ourselves in. It's not one that necessarily touts solutions, because the solution is systemic change. Whether or not we'll manage it is another thing. And I think it reveals the depth and the breadth of the crisis. But rather than being a paralyzing and frightening conversation, I think Alice gives a lot of hope. Because quite frankly, I mean, if you're armed with knowledge, you can actually start to act and do something, right? She says we all have to learn to be farmers. Here's hoping that won't exactly come to pass. I don't think I'd be very good at that. But she also says that there is so much hope for a post-carbon world to restructure our relationships, our communities, our society, and our organization in order to give people a better quality of life, that despite all the progress and despite all of the accessibility and despite all of the modernity, quality of life is not something that has developed alongside those things. So it gives us a chance to ask what's really important for the future. So if you haven't listened to it yet, definitely go do that. To my Patreons or anyone else watching, please do let me know what you think of these bonus episodes. Also, definitely let me know what you think of the podcast. If you have somebody that you'd like me to interview, if you have any thoughts on how, Planet Critical can improve, email me, rachel@planetcritical.com. I would love to hear from you. You can also find out more about the project over at planetcritical.com, where you can subscribe to get the podcast episodes delivered to your inbox every week. You can also subscribe over on the YouTube channel. And I would ask, if you're enjoying Planet Critical, if you get a lot out of it and you have the means, support the project here on Patreon. To those of you who are supporting Planet Critical, thank you. The amount of time that it's taking now to invest in the podcast means that this work genuinely would not be possible without you. Thank you all for watching. I hope it was valuable to you, and I will see you next week.